Hey guys, so as a follow-on to our series of videos with Rob, our financial literacy children's book author, who decided to crowdfund his launch, today we'll be talking with the people who actually made the books into books, a printer. Stay tuned to learn all about what goes into an offset or digital run and what you need to know if you're considering an offset run for your book. Hi, I'm MK Williams, an author and independent publisher. I love sharing my insights about all things self-publishing with you. Before I get into the details of today's topic, don't forget to hit subscribe. You'll be notified every week when I put out new videos about self-publishing, making a career out of being an author, and now being a mompreneur. So today I'll be chatting with Kristin from Formax Printing. She was Rob's main contact when he went through the process of ordering his books. We actually looked at multiple printers in our process, and Formax won out based on price and responsiveness. There was a printer who had a lower price quote for us, but Kristin and her team were so responsive, and we felt confident that they would continue to be helpful should any issues arise. So today, Kristin is talking to us about the printing process. Here's the interview. Hey guys, so before we actually jump into the interview here, and if you're watching this whole series, you may even get sick of hearing me give this little disclaimer to you, but I have a link down below in the description to get a checklist from me. It's going to go over all the details we're covering in the videos in this entire series, from figuring out the illustrator and who you're going to work with, vetting them, interviewing them, determining if you want to do a Kickstarter campaign, all the details that go into it. So I really suggest, if this is something that you're considering, that you click the link below and claim this checklist. I leave space where you can take notes for things, and just a lot of things that Rob and I learned along the way are in here. Now, obviously, your campaign is going to be unique and special to you, so take additional notes elsewhere, but this should really help you get started with planning, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how you guys use this. So definitely make sure to claim this checklist below before you even watch the video, so you can take notes along with, but definitely by the end of watching all these videos, if you are deciding, hey, I really want to do a Kickstarter, this is the checklist that's going to help you. Okay. All right. Talk to you guys soon. Bye. Hi, Kristin. Thank you so much for joining me today on the channel. I'm really excited to talk to you about your vast pool of knowledge on all things printing, to help our authors who are watching who are interested in doing their own crowdsourced book launch. And so we connected through Rob, who wrote M is for Money. And I'd really love to give you just a chance to introduce yourself, who you are, what you do with Formax, who are you?
Well, thank you for having me. My name is Kristin Beatty. I work with Formax Printing. I'm an account executive at the moment, but I started about 6 years ago as a customer service rep. So I have that bit of background for about 3 years, when then I switched over to account executive. At this point, I kind of took on the role of basically reaching out to others. We specialize in book printing, four-color printing, lamination, folding, and matte printing. So we're all across the board, but a lot of that actually does have to do with full color printing, which we can dive into later. But basically, that helps us in that, me personally, I specialize a lot in children's books, especially hardcover or soft cover books, normally on the shorter run side of things. So that's really my type of specialty, but I'm excited to get started and answer some of your questions.
Yes, awesome. Well, I think there's even a few things that you said there that I would love to break down. So can you explain the difference between, the full color, the four color, like all the different color options that you kind of mentioned there, that you work with?
Yeah, so we mainly work with CMYK, which is aka full color, four color. So this is made up of cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. So with all these colors together, they make up all different sorts of colors. And using that process, that is how we print and make all these colorful images. So that is preferred for commercial printing. Mm-hmm. Now, when you are on your online or on websites, that is often used RGB, which is red, green, and blue. So that's the online side of things, which is completely different. So if you're making your artwork and it looks beautiful online on your pictures, it's actually not ideal for printing though. So it would need to be converted over to CMYK, which is acceptable for printing.
Perfect. That is a great tip. And I know that when I go with offset or print on demand for my own books, it has to be in CMYK when I upload it to Amazon when I uploaded to Ingram Spark, and I didn't know why. So that's a really great
Yeah.
explanation of why. Like, I didn't know why. I was
Right.
like, just
And
know it's this one. Yeah.
if you do try to print RGB, which your printer should normally red flag you right there, if you do try to print it, your picture is going to end up diluted, just undesirable results. You're probably not going to be happy with it. So definitely make sure you're keeping an eye out for that.
Awesome. That's perfect. Perfect tip just to right off the bat there. Awesome. Okay. So what I would love to know first, because you mentioned short run, like what is an offset print run? So a lot of the authors who, look at my channel, they're doing self-publishing through Amazon KDP, through Ingram Spark, and that's all print on demand. And I think they all kind of understand that, where like somebody buys it and then 1 gets printed or 10 gets printed or however many are purchased. What is an offset run, and what kind of volumes do authors need to look at for a minimum print run?
Yeah, so offset printing is different than digital printing in that it's kind of like a traditional press you would think of. So a big press, it has printing plates on it, has rotating cylinders that apply to ink onto it. So there is a ton of setup costs that go into that. But if you have a larger quantity, like for books, I would say like 1,000 plus, potentially even 500 and plus, you could be in that range of it's more cost effective to go that route because you have more setup costs in it. But at that quantity, it would just make sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But then on the other end of that is digital, which is going to be on the lower quantities. It's, that is where you have your file is just electronically transferred to the press, where it just goes through a single run, kind of like an at-home printer, almost a fancier version of it, but it just applies it there. And then that's why it's less setup costs, way quicker, lower quantities. So for digital, you're more like 50 to 500.
Okay, that's good to know. That's good to know, because I think a lot of authors who are kind of thinking of that first bulk order, they think in the thousands and they're just like, I don't have enough garage space. Whereas
Yes.
that 50 to 500, that's a bit more reasonable for a
Right,
large
and realistic sometimes. So yeah, that definitely makes sense.
Awesome. Okay. Well, that's really good to know that distinction, because when I sent over the questions for this, just so everybody watching knows, so I said, oh, can we talk about offset runs? And Chris was like, well, what do you want to talk about, digital or offset? And I was like, there's a difference. I don't know that. So yeah, I'm already learning so much from this entire process just by chatting with you. So this is so helpful.
Good.
So when we're looking at, we know that the price per book, the price per book is lower when authors do the digital run and the offset run, but it can be a big upfront investment for the author, right? So like, instead of, they're paying a little bit here, a little bit there every time a book is sold, they have to send all that money before it gets printed. So before submitting the order, what do you think authors should do to double, triple, or even quadruple check before they say, here's my credit card, to make sure that they're getting the best value?
Right. So these are things I think that you need to talk with your printer about and make sure you understand what you're going to be producing, because printing terminology can be a foreign language of its own. So some things you definitely want to touch base about is the dimensions of your book. That'll impact your pricing. Is it landscape? Is it portrait? Is it a square? And then also the quantity. That's probably the big one. So 1,000 plus, you're going to be looking at offset most likely. And then your page count, your bindery. So what type of binding did you have in mind? And then your paper stocks, also your ink throughout, and then any extra finishings. So there's a lot that goes in it, but those are the main things that you should be asking your printer these questions, and they should be able to explain that to you.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah, I know. As Rob was going through his process, he was even like finding things. He's like, oh, that does sound like a good idea. What about this? What about this? And we had been pretty locked in on what we wanted it to be. But I think as he learned about more of the options, it was another decision point of like, okay, well, let's investigate this. Let's kind of go down the line a bit more. So when everything is locked in, they made the decisions on the paper, the color, the ink type, any of the extras. Is there anything that you would recommend that authors do in terms of like QA final checks before they send over the file?
For sending over file, I would certainly ask like for a total pricing and be like, sometimes, there can be sales tax if you live out of state. there can be something called an overrun where they produce additional books just in case some don't meet the quality. And then you may be charged, you may not be charged for those. But if something to keep in mind if you are concerned about moving forward is definitely touch base about doing a proof, whether that's a PDF proof, which is electronic, or a hard copy proof, which is, you receive a completed book most of the time. Those can actually help you make you feel more comfortable in the results you're going to get when it goes into production then.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think some authors get hung up on the, oh, well, if I'm ordering a proof, that's extra money. But when you're ordering potentially 500 books or more, that's a drop in the bucket.
Sometimes it's better to be safe than sorry. It's almost like a comfort level too, just knowing like, hey, I have this, it looks good, I approve it.
Yeah. All right. So what are the biggest issues or misconceptions that you see authors face when they're doing their first offset or digital run?
Okay. Yeah. So by far, hands down, the biggest misconception is the definition of the word page. I know it's like, oh, that's simple. I'm like, no, actually, it's really not sometimes. So, and it happens to almost everybody. So just to sum it up, I have a sample here. So one page equals this front side. The back side of the book is another page, or the back side. So this page 1 and page 2 equal one sheet. So the words sheet and page are often intertwined, making it extremely confusing for both parties. So as a rule of thumb, 2 pages equal one sheet. Perfect. So for example, if you have 100 pages, that's equal to 50 sheets, or vice versa. 50 sheets equals 100 pages. And if you get that confused, which so many people do, it's understandable, then that's going to could completely throw off your pricing, what you can and can't do with the book. So it's definitely something to pin down from the start.
Absolutely. And I even see people have questions about that when they're doing print on demand, whether it's uploading it, because they're like, well, how many pages is a page? Because my PDF says this, but that's back and forth. And so that's good to know. So one sheet is 2 pages, back side and the front side. Perfect. Awesome.
Also just one more thing, that even if it's a blank, it still counts as a page. It still exists. So definitely keep that in mind too.
Perfect. All right. What other good misconceptions do we need to bust?
I think the next biggest one would be the paper options, specifically matte paper stocks. So in the printing world, to sum it up, we have 3 major papers. You have your gloss papers, your matte papers, and your uncoated papers. So gloss paper, that's pretty easy. You're thinking it's shiny, it's got a sheen to it. The colors are bright because it's shiny, they kind of pop. Tricky one is matte though. So matte has a coating on it, which is the big part of this whole thing. It has a coating, which it's more of a dull coating or a satin finish. So it kind of makes the colors a little bit more subdued or muted. But since it is coated, it's not as easy to write on. So I like to do matte for like art books or photography books with watercolors. That's probably most popular, but it's most commonly mistaken for uncoated paper stocks, which uncoated paper stocks have no coating at all, which makes them perfect for like coloring books or journals where I can just take a pencil and write so easily on it, whereas matte you can't. So they can get very confused because in your mind you think they look pretty similar, but they're actually completely different. So just something to keep in mind.
Perfect. That's really good to know, because I think a lot of people, when they're looking at maybe their cover options, I know they could do gloss or matte, and then I think that applies to the interior, but the interior papers are totally different papers.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, you have a lot of options you can play with too then.
Awesome. That's super, super helpful. So what about this whole bleed, no bleed situation? When do we need it? When do we need to keep it in mind? What's going on with that?
Right. When I first started, I was like, what is a bleed? And so the bleed is when the actual ink itself on a piece of paper goes to the edge. So say this book, for example, there's ink that goes all the way to the edge, which that would mean that it does bleed. Now, if it doesn't go to the edge, that we would call no bleeds.
Okay.
So basically, no bleeds is going to be the easier option out of the two, because when it does bleed, you have to have a bigger piece of paper when it's printing on. And you have to have extra area of ink on there, about 1/8 of an inch, so that we can trim down to your final size without any extra white space on it. So it's a little bit trickier, especially on the artwork setup side of things. But it does look good though when it bleeds.
Yeah. Yeah. You're not seeing any like white edges on the side, like
exactly.
extends.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So there's sometimes your printer will ask you to set up your artwork in a specific way. And it's really important for them to know that.
Absolutely. I can't imagine having to redo every single page in a book. That was the difference. So wow.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely want to get that one right. Okay, that's super great to know. So now what's the deal with resolution? What's high res? What's low res? Why does that matter? I mean, I've heard just 300 DPI and I'm like, like I don't speak design, so I can just repeat it, but I don't know what it means. So can you go over what some of the resolution needs to be?
Right. And 300 DPI is that number that you want to keep track with. That is in the printing world considered high resolution, and you want to aim for that number at least. The 300 DPI is considered acceptable, and anything below it, even if you start looking at it, it could look a little fuzzy or just off a little bit. That's probably because it's low res. And so normally if you have a photo that is lower res that you might like get off the internet, it could be because it's that RGB that we talked about, and it's only 72 DPI, which is pretty common for RGB. So this is definitely something if you have like a designer or a formatter, reach out to them and they may be able to help you set up those images correctly, because you really don't want to produce anything below 300 DPI or it's going to look fuzzy.
Okay. That's super, super helpful to know. And that's something I talked with Formatted Books, their company, they just format books, which is great. It's in their name. And so they said 300 DPI and I was like, great. I was like, I don't know what it means. You're the designers. And so I think that kind of goes back to what you said before. Like if you, as the author, you're good with words, you wrote the book. If you don't understand some of the design language, the designer you're working with, or hopefully the print house you're working with can explain it. And if they're not explaining things, it's maybe a red flag that they're not going to be as helpful through the process. Like it's understandable. You're going to have questions. So be sure to ask them. Yeah. Awesome. Super, super helpful. So in addition, so a lot of authors know like paperback and hardcover, but there's all these different kinds of binding types and there's other ways that books are presented. So can you kind of go into some of the different options that you've even worked with for books that go beyond just like the basic paperback, hardcover?
Yes. There's actually so many options the more you get into it. So I brought a few samples of my own to show you guys. So basically we'll start off with a regular perfect bound book. So this is going to be a regular paperback book that you would see in maybe Barnes and Noble. It's, it has that binding on the edge. It's like a perfect, edge here, which is super great. It's really popular with like children's books, author like graphic novels and such. So this is a really popular option if you want your books to be flat, like against like a bookshelf or on the table. Very, very popular. There is also with this, you can make it into a hardcover book. So these hardcovers, they have a really durable cover, but still perfect bound where you get that nice, perfect edge, is super clean looking. That's always a really nice option. It's normally a little bit more than regular perfect binding, the soft covers, but it's really nice looking. Some other options that we have are saddle stitching, which has 2 staples on the binding edge that staples all the books or staples all the sheets together to create one booklet. This is super popular if you just have like black ink on the inside and it's like a workbook or a coloring book, a journal. So that's a really cost-effective option out of all these. Some other options that we have are wiro binding, which is going to be like a double loop metal wire.
Mhm.
So this, I think, has a really sophisticated look to it, allows you to open up the book completely. And
Mhm.
then you can, that way you're not pressing a book down, write on it without having to like hold it in place.
Mhm.
But the other side of that is just the regular spiral binding,
Okay.
which is a plastic. So you can do wire or plastic depending on your look. If it's with children, you may want to go spiral because it's plastic.
Yeah.
If you're looking for a more sophisticated look, you could go wire. But there's different options there. And then the other type of method that we have is like a ringed binder
Okay.
or like a ring set.
Okay. So lots of options. And it's so interesting. We worked together on a children's book for Rob's book. But there are so many different kinds of books out there. And I think sometimes authors get really set in their mind of like their genre. But, even seeing, the Wyra one you held up, I'm like, oh, that would be great for like some of the workbooks I've worked on, or even the binder set. I worked with a woman who she had an online course. She wanted to write a workbook for it. And, if she taught that as a seminar, she'd probably want it to be the binder to be able to like just hand out to people easily. And they could kind of put other sheets in there. So it is important to keep in mind, like to not just think this binary, like paperback, hardcover, like there are other options out there for us authors. And when we get creative, that's when we get new ideas.
Something I think you should ask yourself is like, how are users intending on to use the book? So like coloring books, you want those to kind of lay flat so you can color on them. Spiral wire, you might want to rip pages out of it. Binder, you might just want to remove pages here and there and put in new ones. So just if you ask yourself that question, you might be able to like get on track of where would be the best option for you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's super important to keep in mind, not to just go with one or two options. Like think about it, like have that plan beforehand.
Yeah.
So when an author sends their artwork, they have their quote. I know you mentioned seeing a digital proof, what goes into that and what should they be looking at when they do this digital proof?
Some things to take a look at when you are going through your PDF proof is typos. Make sure your pages are in order. Make sure the colors look good. There you could go make sure your page numbers are on the right side of the page, not just like the physical right, but like the unbound side. Some other things to take a look at is maybe your words are too close to the binding edge. You don't want it to get lost in the spine if it's a perfect bound book. You really want to just look it over completely, page by page. And sometimes it's helpful to have someone else look over it too, just a different set of eyes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would say by the time that you're getting to a printer, if that's the route you're going, you've probably seen the book so many times you can recite it in your sleep. So yeah, having a fresh set of eyes, they're going to catch something that you don't see because you've seen it so many times. So that's a really great tip.
It happens all the time too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely. And we're all human. So that's why it's always good to have those extra set of eyes. Awesome. Well, what other tips do you have for authors who are thinking of going, with the crowdsourced route and then they need a big shipment of books? What are some other big tips that you have from working with authors who've done this?
Yeah, maybe some other tips I might have, like if you're starting like crowdfunding, you want to maybe get that idea that how much money I'm going to need up front is maybe, first of all, definitely ask your printer, what is the total amount that I would owe in this situation based off of this quote? If there shouldn't really be hidden fees, and sometimes I guess there can be, but in particular, like shipping costs. Where will this be shipping to? Is it going to be a commercial or residential location? And then do you need these by a certain date? Because with the paper situation recently, it is all over the place. So it's extremely important these days to ask about that. Another thing is definitely ask about the proofs. You can get hard copy proofs most of the time for an additional amount, but this can extend your production time too. So something else to think about. Trying to think about, and then for artwork side, if you ever are confused on how to set up your artwork, you should definitely reach out. Every company's different and they might have a different set of rules, but maybe they might have templates that you could go off of, either enter into or mirror or use as a reference. That might be really helpful for you, your designer or your formatter.
Perfect. Those are all great tips. And again, as somebody who's done this a lot versus somebody who's helped someone do this once. This is super, super helpful to know. And that's actually part of the reason why Rob and I decided to go with Formax was because you're so helpful. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So if authors are watching this and they want to get in touch with you or with Formax to handle an offset run or a digital run, how can they reach you?
Yeah, well, my name is Kristin Beatty. I just got married, so it's also Kristin Cronenberg. So my phone number is 314-434-5500. Just ask for Kristin. I'm the only one there. That's Kristin. And then my email is Kristin, Kristin @formaxprinting.com.
Awesome. Perfect. Perfect. It was so great to chat with you today, and we'll be in touch again soon.
Great. Thanks for having me.
All right. And below, I'm going to have a link to some checklists for you to be able to look through if you are considering doing a digital run, which is a shorter order, a full offset run, which would be a much larger order, all the things you need to think about and really understand some of those nitty-gritty details she was talking about. All right. If you found this information helpful, please give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to hit subscribe. That lets YouTube know that you got value from this video and can get it in front of other authors like us. Now you can get back to writing your book. Hey, if you want to continue to support this channel and my other creative work, please head over to buymeacoffee.com and support my channel. You can buy me 1 coffee, 3, 5, 10, or you can even get a membership. Those who are in the membership are actually going to be included in the acknowledgements pages of all of my published books moving forward as a big thank you. And you can even get some additional options to get an Instagram thank you post shout out or a shout out in an upcoming video. Thank you so much for supporting this channel.